quite honestly, I don't think that there's anything that they can do to mitigate the collapse. We are already well in it. We are just starting to feel the impact of the rapid rate rises that the global central banks have done. We're not at the end game of that. We're at the beginning of that. I am absolutely a huge prepper. If you don't hold it, you don't own it. Because governments are not about protecting the population anymore. They're about sustaining themselves and protecting themselves, and that is definitely true with central banks. It's a divide and conquer kind of circumstance. I do think that we're going to see a civil war. No, this isn't over. We've barely seen the tip of the iceberg.
Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. We got once again back in the house Lynette Zang, Chief Market Analyst at ITM Trading, a financial expert as far as I'm concerned. She makes very complicated economic concepts very easy to understand. So I'm hoping that she's going to enlighten us as to what's going on with the markets today and what we can expect moving forward. It's a pleasure to have you back on the channel. How you've been doing?
Oh, I've been doing great because these markets are so darn interesting. What an interesting year, but I'm very happy to be back, Nate. Thank you for having me.
Yes, and I think I've come well dressed today. We're representing the Bears. All right.
Here you go.
I got my money printer.
Oh, good.
I'm set. Yeah.
Awesome.
The only thing I don't have on me is gold, but I have a feeling by the end of this conversation, I'll be getting some.
Silly boy, you should have lots and lots of gold and silver in your possession. We can fix that.
I do have some, it's just not in my possession. It's buried somewhere far away. So it's in a hole in the ground somewhere. Put it that way.
Yeah. Well, you want to be diversified.
Absolutely. But I'm thinking, I'm thinking now is a good time to maybe get in on the gold market again, because seems to be a lack of interest, and usually that's the best time to kind of get into something is when nobody's paying attention to it. It appears that the housing market's in a bubble, the stock market's still in a bubble. Everything's in a bubble with the exception of some commodities right now. But maybe before we talk about gold, what is your take on the current state of the economy? It seems as though maybe the worst is past and things are only going to get better from here on in. What do you think?
I think it's just the opposite. And you can look on a global basis and you can see what's happening in Japan with them basically expanding their yield curve control because they were losing control, and they are losing control, just decades of failed policy, and the whole world is following Japan's failed policy. You can look at China, who has now officially fallen into deflation, but they were generating 40% of the global GDP, so to make things look great, and that isn't just Japan or China, because we're all incestuously interconnected. Read Argentina, that just devalued their currency and raised their interest rates to quote unquote fight inflation, which is a joke. So what I will say is coming to a theater near you. These are all indicators of where we are on a global basis.
Can you talk a bit about the yield curve and help people understand that? My audience, some might be financial experts, but others might just be dipping their toes in this kind of stuff. So can you explain the concept of yield curve and why that is such a leading indicator for hard times ahead?
I'll do my best, because the yield curve is supposed to indicate the cost of money, right? So typically, if you're a lender, and somebody else is borrowing, you will charge them less the shorter period of time that they have to borrow the money, because you're going to get it back faster, right? So if this is interest rates and this is the principal value of the bond, right? When interest rates go down like they pushed interest rates, central bankers pushed interest rates down to zero, but they've been on a downward trend since the 80s. Then the market value of the bonds that are out there go up, And when they raise interest rates like they've been doing, the central bankers, then the market value of the bonds go down. So you can see if this is when it's issued, typically and normally, the longer maturity, you can see the interest rates would be higher the longer you go out. I mean, why would you loan somebody money for 30 years if you're going to get less than if you loaned it to them for 2 years? And that's what's happening with an inverted yield curve, is that the shorter term yields are higher than the longer term yields. And in many ways, that starves investment. Because again, why would you, unless they're your children, why would you loan somebody money for 30 years for a lower yield? Because inflation on top of that erodes the value of the money you get back. So in other words, you can buy less with it in the future than you can buy with it today. Did that make any sense?
Absolutely, yep. Yeah.
Okay. So in Japan, that have been now 3 decades, they call it the 3-decade loss, has been juggling with the yields and the money creation. You said you have your money gun, we could play central banker. Every time there's been a rough spot for the corporations, for Wall Street, wherever Wall Street is in the world, but for Wall Street, what have the central bankers done? But they've created more money, created more inflation to make it look like prices are going up. But the reality is it's the purchasing power value of the currency that's actually going down. It's really quite a genius. It's an evil genius, but it's really quite a genius experience, because what they then do is they tax that inflation that they create. So you buy a stock at 10 and it goes to 100 and you think that, wow, look at this, it went up, but you can buy less with that $100 if you sold that stock than you could originally with that $10 bill, because its value has gone down.
Right.
Where we are is we have virtually officially no value left in the purchasing power. Officially, there's 3 cents out of that original dollar, but it makes things look like they've gone up. No, not really. That's nominal confusion. And that's how they get you and keep you in the system.
That's interesting, because I was looking at, I watched a video on YouTube yesterday, and it's a guy who's in Russia. They have a family YouTube channel in Russia, very apolitical, they don't talk about the war or anything like that. But he went into a grocery store and he was showing what he could buy with $1 or 100 rubles, which is now, of course, as you know, the ruble compared to the dollar isn't doing so well. But what he could buy with that dollar, I mean, he could buy probably about $10 worth of stuff that it would cost you to buy here. So that one, US dollar in Russia could buy way more than it could buy here. So our prices here are so inflated. It's unthinkable. Like, the prices of everything here are just exploding. There's people they're going into depression, like mental health depression, because of the prices here in Canada. They're just so unmanageable, and everybody's going into more and more debt. So it seems as though we've been duped into believing that this fiat-based system is somehow benefiting us, when really it isn't. I mean, if you look at, the difference between like San Francisco and Moscow, what is the better quality of life when, sure, maybe you're not making as much money in Moscow, but your money buys a lot more? So I don't know. What are your thoughts on this whole ruble dollar situation?
Well, okay, I really do think that currency to currency valuation is just a smokescreen, because whether you're talking about rubles or you're talking about dollars or yuan or any currency, on a global basis, those currencies are all losing purchasing power value. And what I like to use is, can you see how tiny this little $1 gold coin is? It's a 20th of an ounce of gold, right? Well, back in the day, You could have had a $1 gold coin, 20th of an ounce, a $1 coin, a silver coin, or a $1 bill. And you could have bought 11 loaves of bread with, take your pick, any one of them, right? Today in the US, you're not even getting a quarter of a loaf. Maybe you're getting like a fifth of a loaf of bread, something like that, if you're lucky. But you could, the last time I checked, you could still buy 11 loaves of bread with this $1 silver ounce of silver, and you could buy 135 loaves of bread with this 20th of an ounce of gold. And when they created this whole system, they knew a lot of things, but they knew two key things. Number one, that people marry the legal money of the state, wherever you are, and they cannot hope but wish or assume that it will regain some of its purchasing power. It never does. It's by design that you're losing that purchasing power. But they also knew that it creates nominal confusion. So if you had, like you said, but if you had a $20 bill 10 years ago and you have a $20 bill today, nominally they're identical. They're both $20 bills. But what that $20 bill would buy you 10 years ago, 5 years ago, heck, 6 months ago, and what it would buy you today is vastly different. So for governments, they get to tax you. That's that almost invisible inflation tax. And they don't have to go through legislation because they get to use the new money before you do. By the time it trickles down to the system, it's lost a whole lot of value. But for corporations, they get to pay you less, even though for you, it looks like you're getting paid more. So for example, 1971, the average wage was $9,500. And a family of four could live on that with one wage earner. Today, it's something like $59,000. And so normally you would go, well, yeah, I'd much rather have $59,000 than $9,500. But you need two wage earners and you're living paycheck to paycheck. And what did they stimulate? Anything below $150,000. But some earning like $220,000 a year are still living paycheck to paycheck, and everybody's taking on enormous debt. And I'll tell you one thing that really scares me like crazy is when I see people that are buying food at the grocery store, putting it on those, break it into 4 easy payments. So taking on debt, putting it on credit card or putting it on those easy credit plans. I mean, you got to have food to live, right?
Mm-hmm. So at what point does the system break? I mean, does it reach a point where the cost of living crisis becomes unsustainable and people are out there in the streets with pitchforks, or what happens? Like how does the government pivot and mitigate the coming crisis? Because obviously this has to reach a breaking point, one would think.
Well, have you noticed how often if you're listening to the talking heads on TV, they'll say, well, this is unusual. Well, this isn't the way that it usually happens. All of these unique things that are happening are an indication of a system that's already breaking down. What they can do to mitigate it, I mean, what we've seen is more and more money printing, and that it's taking more and more and more to get less and less and less results. So quite honestly, I don't think that there's anything that they can do to mitigate the collapse. We are already well in it, and the system died in 2008. And I've been talking about the reset since 2009. So they have to reset the total system that's social, economic, as well as financial. And I think that everybody could agree that we've had a huge shift in the social system over the last few years. And you were talking about mental health. It's a divide and conquer kind of circumstance. So they've divided, families. They have divided people that would communicate. And together to come together and create that community to support each other. And I think that's why you're seeing so much mental illness now and people talking about it so openly.
Yeah, it almost seems like the further this system deteriorates, the more they have to isolate everybody into their virtual reality bubbles, or the more they stand to benefit by alienating the population so that, they can't ever unify and resist this looming whatever the next phase is going to be, whether it's a central bank-backed digital currency or just a total reset of the system somehow. They need to compartmentalize everybody so that they can't unite, and especially along political lines, as we're seeing now. I mean, who knows what 2024 is going to bring? At this rate, it could be a civil war for all we know. So what is the next?
I think actually that's coming. I do think that we're going to see a civil war. And if you stop and think about what was happening prior to 2020, there was definitely a rise of populism. Then they were able to squash a lot of that. I mean, look at Hong Kong, right? Hong Kong's like the most perfect example of how they can squash that populist rising, but it's rising again on a global basis. I mean, you can see what's been happening in France. You can see what just happened in Argentina, right? So, as well as the US. I mean, nobody is immune from this. So personally, I think we are going to see a revolution. And Ray Dalio, I mean, I agree with him on that score.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about CBDCs. Last time you briefly touched on it, but can you talk about how they're going to migrate us from a fiat-based system to a central bank-backed digital currency system, what those are, and why it takes us even further away from the most base level monetary system, which is gold and precious metals. Can you talk a little bit about the strategy there in how they're going to pivot?
Absolutely, because they know how to do it. And by the way, they've really been moving us that since the 20s, but particularly since the 50s, when we then now had credit cards, right? So the way that they do it is by making the transition as invisible as possible, by keeping the systems as close to what's normal as possible. So I know this is not a popular thought process, but I read the 1996 NSA white paper on how to create a mint. And I don't think that it's a coincidence that Bitcoin came out in January of 2009 and quantitative easing, all this money printing, came out in March of 2009. That's just not a coincidence. Also, one of the things that they always do is they allow people to make a lot of money as they're transitioning into the system. Gets a lot more eyes on that, and they get a lot more easy adoption. And the last time I checked, there were 16% of the US adult population that had in some way, shape, or form dealt with cryptocurrencies. And we've been dealing with the digital dollar. I mean, I happen to like to pay with cash or frankly with gold or silver, and in some instances I actually can do that. But, we're already used to using the debit cards, the credit cards, so that digitization of the money. So it wouldn't really be a big leap for people to, unfortunately, adopt the CBDCs. Now, here's the difference between the three monetary systems that we're talking about. When we were on the gold standard and even the bimetal standard, but when you could walk into a bank with this and walk out with this, it was convertible, right? It got us used to being comfortable with this crap, right? But if you didn't like what the government was doing, you would simply walk into a bank and convert the bill into the gold, pull the gold out of the system, and then...
And just to maybe interject there, now you can still exchange the dollars for gold, but you can't necessarily go into a bank and do it. It's a harder process. They put a few like steps. You got to go to a gold broker now.
Right, like ITM trading, or there are other companies as well. So I'm glad you brought that up, because you're absolutely right. We can convert this garbage into real money. Not at this rate. This is a $20 bill. This is a $20 gold piece. So you're going to pay a whole lot more than $20 for this now. And it's not that gold has gone up, the value, it's that this has gone down. So yes, this forced fiscal responsibility, which is something the government doesn't like to do. So they transitioned us into the fiat money. Now, if you have a bill, that's a debt instrument that doesn't pay interest. Does it charge interest well, it does, because of the inflation tax, but it is a debt instrument at a zero coupon. So if you pull this out of the system at this point, you can maintain your principal, not your purchasing power, but your principal. That's a problem, because they need to attack it since there's virtually no purchasing power left. Taking us into the CBDC system gives them a lot more visibility and control, because today when they create policy, it takes 12 to 18 months working through the system before they see the result. So on a global basis, if we look at where we are right now, we are just starting to feel the impact of the rapid rate rises that the global central banks have done. We're not at the end game of that. We're at the beginning of that. And people need to realize that. This is a gift. You need to take advantage of this gift and get physical gold and silver in your possession. Now, going into the CBDCs, what they say, what the central banks, the IMF says, once we have the CBDCs, there are no limitations to how low we can push interest rates. Because guess what? Negative rates or positive rates are a choice. Okay, why in the world would you loan somebody money and agree to get back less than what you loaned them unless they're your children? Because that's the only entity that I would do that for, right? And if you think about it logically, I'm working hard for my money. Why would I do that? But they don't want you to have any choice. And we are a consumer-driven economy. This is basically true globally-ish. I mean, China has been, we've been working on that in the US since the 20s, and again, more like the 50s. China's been doing it since the 2000s, trying to transition their population into a consumer-driven economy.
And that's what that would do, right? Because you would want to spend your money because it's losing value. So it would encourage consumption.
That's exactly right. So people ask me all the time, well, what about deflation? Well, inflation are the same coin. They're just the opposite side of the coin. And it doesn't really matter, because isn't that what people do during hyperinflation when they can see the value of their currency decline like crazy, right? So they go out and they put it in anything. Doesn't matter what it is. Anything that they think is going to hold its purchasing power better.
So you're talking about the end of like physical money, because we've already seen the near end of precious metals. It's still there, and maybe in the same way, physical dollars, paper money will still be accessible in some way, but you might have to go through several hoops. You got to go and meet with the bank manager or something and give them a reason as to why you need these dollars or whatever. But I think that's important for people to realize. We're talking about no more physical anything. It's all digital.
That's the goal. Because then they do have so much more control, but they're not going to take the cash away, to your point. They say that they're not going to take the cash away. They're going to get you to volunteer it. And the way that they're going to get you to volunteer it is that there will be a chip inside each bill that will parallel the decline in interest rates in the banking system. So if you go to withdraw it or you go to deposit it, it's going to reflect the loss of value. So you deposit $20, but maybe all that shows up is 16 because of the negative interest rates. Or what they say is they like distance, right? They like distance between their policy and how it's delivered to the public. So for example, and this is their example, not mine, that you go to the bank you go to say you go to a coffee shop and there's a sign there that says, okay, if you pay in cash, it's $6. And if you pay with a debit or credit card or electronically, it's $5. Well, what are most people going to choose to do? They're going to choose to use their card because it appears cheaper. And so they manipulate you. It's called financial repression. It's been a steady policy since the 50s to get you, to nudge you, their terminology, not mine, to nudge you in the direction that they want you to go. Because if you make that choice, then who do you blame? You blame yourself.
Mm-hmm. And as preppers, especially with people have concerns about the robustness of the power grid, and of course, all of these changes you're talking about would require that we offload the entirety of the monetary responsibility onto something which requires electricity to function, for one. So whatever happens if there's the grid goes down, and then what do, right? You have no means of bartering anymore aside really old school one-to-one barter.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
I think right now, if you look at what is the actual statistic? What do they call it? And this is something I don't hear a lot of people talking about it, but they call it the all-in sustaining costs in the gold mining industry. And not many people seem to pay attention to this, that, the cost of mining gold is getting higher and higher. And absolutely. So the return, the ROI on gold mining, and the actual amount produced year over year is going to be in decline. So if you even project out 20 years, there's a very good chance that the cost to mine an ounce of gold is going to go up substantially, and that there's going to be less and less supply. So, it only makes sense that you have a resource which is finite, it's scarce, everybody's wanted it since the beginning of time, and you have the government scrambling to get everybody into this matrix type system. It seems like $1,900 for an ounce is cheap. And I'm not trying to sell anybody on this. I'm just the logic of it makes sense. There's less and less gold mines that are, pumping out gold. Yes, gold production is still at record highs, but it's at a record cost too. So, and the overall supply is projected to shrink. So, it's just a no-brainer if you want to preserve the value of the labor that you've done throughout your life, to invest it in the safest investment, which is not to say that maybe the stock market doesn't melt up a bit more and, maybe there's...
It will. As people are trying to flee the inflation, it will. That's what happens.
Sure. Yeah. It's not to say that there's not other investments within the system that you can still profit from, but I personally will be putting a very sizable amount of my overall net worth into precious metals because it just seems a sensible thing to do at this point.
Well, here's the other thing that I really never really hear people talk about, and that is that gold and silver, physical, are used in every single sector of the global economy. So you have the broadest base of buyer. So when you're going through a system, this crap is used in one place. And by the way, 1 trillion times zero is zero. So whatever investments that you're holding in fiat money assets, what happens when those fiat money assets go to zero? So we've been taught that the only options are Wall Street options. And that diversification is stocks and bonds and annuities and ETFs and all that garbage. But all of those are dollar denominated, and you can only convert them into dollars when you want to liquidate. So if that dollar has zero value, nobody trusts it, nobody wants to take it, and it doesn't matter whether it's a Canadian dollar or US dollar or Japanese yen or whatever. If the public loses confidence in that currency, you have absolutely nothing. Will the stock market melt up? Yeah, because people don't understand that they're not really, it's out of the frying pan into the fire. It doesn't really help them. And as you know, it's funny because I am absolutely a huge prepper. Food, water, energy, security, barterability, wealth preservation, community, and shelter. That's my mantra. That's what I've been executing because I did not think I would see this in my lifetime. So I bought this property in dead central Phoenix in 2010. And because I was never a gardener, that was just not anything that I particularly was interested in. But I've been studying money and monetary history. I've been a banker and a stockbroker. I understand that language. And I see what they're doing. So I became a farmer, and I am. Not only am I an urban farmer, but in 2020, I realized the hole in my personal strategy, which was that there were riots near my home and riots near my children's home. And I slept in bed with a gun one night.
To your point about becoming more self-reliant, there was maybe a point where it wasn't financially lucrative or beneficial when compared to, like, say, investing an hour of your labor in working for somebody else. Maybe you make your $20, you can go and buy $20 worth of calories from the grocery store. Nowadays, the prices are so inflated that that hour that you spend in the garden, the yield you get from that is much greater. I mean, just the tomatoes we're pulling off and the green peppers and the berries that we're picking. I mean, the cost of that, if we were to buy it at the store, is astronomical today. So, but we just spent $500 on school supplies for the kids. And it was just like, there's a few bags of things. It's like, where did this go? Like, what is this? So eventually that has to reach a point where we're going to see, I've always said that we're going to see, we are the 99% 2.0, whatever that's going to manifest in. It's probably going to be some kind of controlled opposition or something for all we know. But it's only a matter of time before people start, and this is why it's so important for people to remember that there are many things that you can get for free, whether it's from the earth, the water, you can do things, you can build a life that is more self-reliant. If you are just a little bit crafty, there's cheap ways to live. And with that money that you do earn, you can convert some of it into precious metals to retain the value, and that is going to maintain its value over time. And I mean, we're at really, what was the peak? I think it first hit $1,900 in 2008. So, I mean, now we're still at the same price, and you got to ask yourself, when is the next run up going to happen for gold? I mean, what is your projections for gold?
Well, a few things. Number one, what you're looking at is the spot gold market, which is simply a contract market. And what's happening in the physical market, even though like bullion or like this is just a raw $20 gold piece, it is pre-33, but it will be guided by what happens in the spot market, but that does not reflect the true fundamental value of an ounce of gold. And in the physical market, we're seeing something very, very different. This is a slabbed coin, right? And we're seeing these, highs were made in 2008, 2009, but we've had breakout in these. And in the ultra rarities, because this is not a particularly rare coin, it's just, an ounce of gold, but It is mid-state 63, which means it's never been in circulation. There's a finite number of them. There's a finite number of all physical gold. But in the rarefied air, so the coins, the collectible coins that are super rare, that is making all-time highs. Who can afford those? We're talking about millions of dollars for an ounce of gold. It's the 1% that can afford it. You and I can't, well, I don't know about you. I can't afford it. And, you know, you don't have to. You just want to be in the same classification. But who's going to write the laws? Who's going to have the ability to influence those that write the laws? It's going to be the 1%. So for me, because I do believe that we've got a real good shot of seeing an overt confiscation of monetary gold. I could be wrong, you know, but even current history is showing us that desperate governments do desperate things and they will confiscate the gold, even if they call it some kind of levy or tax or whatever. They're going to do that to try and keep you away from it and fill their own coffers, because governments are not about protecting the population anymore. They're about sustaining themselves and protecting themselves. And that is definitely true with central banks. It's all about that. But something that we have coming up on the Beyond Gold and Silver channel is I'm so excited about this. I recently hired a new farm manager, and she knows lots of stuff. I mean, she's amazing. But one of the things that she knows is how to forage. So for those living in the city, she knows how, so we'll be doing videos on this, on how to find food in the city, free food, things that people think are weeds, like purslane would be an example, dandelions are an example, but yet they are nutritionally dense and they're delicious. And there's more. I know I can recognize those, but she really knows that well. And we'll be going up to my bug out location to do forest foraging as well. So there, to your point, there's all different ways that you can feed your family for free. It's one of the reasons why I actually planted out the exterior of my property. I'm on a corner and I put in food hedges and lots of food out there so that if somebody's passing by and they need to feed their family, they can pick a pomegranate, they can pick a zucchini. I can replace those if I need to. I've got my bug out location and we just finished putting in orchards up there. We've got 3 dome hot houses so we can grow, because we do get snow there. You get snow where you are too, but we can grow all year round. So yeah, I'm definitely
cool. And which YouTube channel is that? That's not on the ITM channel?
No, that's on the Beyond Gold and Silver channel.
Okay. We'll be sure to put a link to that in the description.
Oh, absolutely, because we really try and meet people wherever they're at and bring value to every situation. So yeah, my whole little community that I've been building to create all of this, they all have GoPros, and you know they're going to show you everything. And we recently hired I have 2 full-time farmers down here in Central Phoenix. So I've got my farm manager and then her assistant, Jason B., who is actually quite new to growing food. And so that's perfect because he's going to make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes, right? But you're going to get to learn from it and you're going to get to learn right along with him. But if you're an expert, come and join us and help educate people. And that's free. That's absolutely free. You can go on Beyond Gold and Silver and, you know, watch all of the videos. So we really try and bring value, prepping value there, the economic value on ITM trading. But guess what? I can use my chicken eggs. That's a tool of barter. Anything physical or any talent you have is also barterable.
You know, I have to ask you though, you said a couple things there in passing. You said gold confiscation, you could see that becoming a reality. Now,
in the U.S. Mm-hmm.
In the U.S. Well, I don't. In Canada, we don't have any gold in Canada, so I don't know if it's all going to the Queen or what. But how do you think they would do that? And how would a person protect themselves against something like that?
Well, I think again, they're going to want you to volunteer. And
Right.
so I think they will take a similar, I think they will take an approach where, since in the US anyway, most of the gold is held in IRAs. If somebody owns gold, they hold it. I don't, but a lot of people do. So let's say that the manipulated spot gold market is at $2,000 an ounce or $3,000 an ounce. I don't know, pick a number. Then what they would do is pay you a premium. So it's at $2,000. They go, okay, we're going to take your gold, but we're going to leave you $3,000 an ounce.
Yay.
Exactly. That's what most people would do, right? And then once they got all the gold that they thought they were going to get, then you've got your overnight revaluation.
Right. They're gonna they're gonna do that. And everybody's gonna
Yes, exactly. So that's the way I think that they're going to do it, because if they can't come at you for it and just take it, you're going to go, no, you're going to fight, you're going to get upset, but if they pay you a premium, so how do you fight against it? Number one, if you don't hold it, you don't own it. So if you hold it inside of any vehicle, look at the fine print. Right? There is no depository that the government says you got to turn over the gold that's going to go, oh no, we have to protect our customers. They're going to comply. So don't hold it like that. Hold it personally. I used to have an IRA. Do I have it anymore? Heck no, I do not. I still have a retirement plan, but I hold it, and therefore I own it, and therefore I control it. And that's what you can do as far as your gold and your silver is. Hold it physically. Now, I believe in diversification, right? So, and there's different kinds of gold and silver depending upon what you're trying to accomplish, right? So for me, silver is about barterability. I need to put a tank of gas in my car, or I need to buy some strawberries or something like that. So I like a variety of sizes. And my barterable, the first line of defense is cash, because that's what most people will recognize initially.
Yeah.
But your second line of defense is your barterable silver, and then your barterable gold. So you want to hold somewhere you can access it. Obviously, just like you, I'm way too visible. I can't really hold it in my house. But I hold it in a private vault, not a bank safe deposit box, a private vault that I can walk to.
And why not a bank deposit box?
Because they have ties to the federal government. And it's really easy if they close their doors. How are you going to access it? Plus, there are limitations on what you can hold there. So you've got to read your fine print. But back in the day so this was a while ago when I was still working with clients, I had a little old lady in California that they opened up her box because I guess they were suspicious. She was this little old lady. I mean, can't imagine. And she got a letter from them apologizing because she only held slab coins in there, right? So there are limitations on what you can hold, like you can't hold cash in a safe deposit box, and you can't hold monetary gold or silver in a safe deposit box. So you got to hold the right kind if you're going to hold it in a bank. But my concern is them shutting the doors and you having no access, like we've seen with other bail-ins in different countries. They bang on the doors. Do they care? No, they don't care.
Because when you put your money in the bank owns it, correct?
That is absolutely correct. Legally, they own it. You simply become a beneficial owner, and your benefit primarily is your perception that you own something. And maybe if it's a stock or a bond, they'll pay you the dividend or the interest, right? So that you still have that perception. But legally, that's owned by the big banks and the hedge funds and, all the Wall Street guys. It's not owned by you. And when you make that deposit, legally, they can sweep those deposits into sub-accounts that are, guess what, in their names. And then they get to use your equity to borrow, and they can do anything they want with that money. And by the way, more than 50% typically anymore, more than 50% of a bank's income is not from the loans like we think, but it's from trading. It's from taking on risk. It's from trading derivatives and these big bets. And when they go wrong, like we all saw in 2008, did anybody go to jail? Why? Because it was not illegal. What they did was not illegal. Evil, disgusting, vile, everything else, but not illegal.
Yeah.
And guess who writes all the contracts? We are in such a very fragile position. All the banks are underwater. They're all underwater.
The best way to support this channel is to support yourself by gearing up at CanadianPreparedness.com, where you'll find high-quality survival gear at the best prices, no junk, and no gimmicks. Use discount code PREPPINGGEAR for 10% off. Don't forget, the strong survive, but the prepared thrive. Stay safe.